I think we're going to go ahead and try to get started. And thank you. We have a small audience, but a vital audience. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Steve Young, and I'm co-chair of ESIP's Air Quality Group. And my fellow co-chair is Beth Huffer, who is here. I call her co-chair emerita. Karen Moe is also here. And our wonderful ESIP community fellow, Sahara Ali, is supporting us wonderfully. So we're kind of the team. And the timing of our session was a little bit awkward right at the end of the meeting, and people are checking out and other people have left. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and roll with kind of an overview about air quality. And then we're going to do a quick round of Slido questions and try to get a little bit of input from our participants via Slido. And then Karen is going to talk about the work that she's been doing in Cheverly, Maryland, the community work. And then we'll have some open-ended discussion, hopefully, about the air quality, the community toolkit concept. So, air quality, and let's see if I'm hitting page down and it's not Sahara. Oh, I just needed to wake up. Okay, so air quality matters, surprise. Depending on what source you look at, anywhere from 4 million to 7 million to 10 million excess deaths occur annually globally due to poor air quality. And I believe, welcome Susan, we have probably the biggest attendance ever in, in one of our sessions. I believe the World Health Organization recently published the 10 million figure. So it's causing a lot of excess deaths. And the manner in which air quality affects human health is really broad. There are cancer concerns, there are heart disease concerns, stroke, asthma, more subtle neurological impacts, mental health impacts, developmental effects. So it's obvious, you hear people coughing when the air quality is really bad, but some of these health impacts are subtle and yet really significant. In addition to human health, air quality affects plants. And so billions of dollars in crop damage. Soybeans alone are heavily affected by elevated ozone levels, and billions as quantified by, I believe, NASA, and ecosystems in general are harmed by poor air quality. In addition, vulnerable communities are disproportionately affected by poor air quality. Often vulnerable communities are located close to concentrations of industrial facilities, and so air toxic pollution can be very high where vulnerable communities are located. Further, climate change and population growth are creating a feedback loop that is making the problem is getting worse, basically. Thanks, Sahara. So a few elements to consider. I'm just kind of throwing out a few things to work into the mix. The research to operations challenge, we've been hearing this week a lot of wonderful research that pertains to air quality, but operationalizing some of the great ideas is a challenge that we need to confront. The FAIR principles, great to follow the FAIR principles. When people are building models, are they moving towards interoperability of their air quality models and scalability of their models? Some of the models work at it's a site-specific model. Can it be scaled to be more generalized? And it's important, we want actionable information that decision makers can actually use at every level, from personal decision making, what should I be doing if the air quality is poor, up to the highest levels of governmental and societal decision making. A few other themes: can good guidance be developed and provided to people who are exposed to poor air quality? Can we leverage community or citizen science? Can we develop field usable apps? The sort of, lots of folks have a weather app on their phone. Can we help to provide air quality apps that work on people's phones? And environmental epidemiology, there's so much that we still don't know about how air quality is affecting people's health. So that's really important. And with the smarts in the ESIP community, applying AI to help analyze relationships between air quality and health endpoints is important. A moment on getting real with data. And when I say that, everyone's heard the term real time. And I think most people have a sense of, okay, yeah, I understand what real time means and why that tends to be important. How about real place, where you're talking about a known place that's relevant? So, for example, we're sitting here in a very cold room. Do we know what's in the air that we're breathing right now, sitting here in the room, or those of us who are remote where you are? I feel like I don't have a clue about what's in the air that I'm breathing right now. So real place means, what's, in this case, what's the air quality in a real place of interest? And finally, real stuff, back to that theme of what's in the air, what's the composition, and what are the concentration levels of pollutants in the air. So stuff is colloquial, but it's shorthand. I wanted a single syllable for, what's in it, okay? There's also this overarching idea of environmental right to know, a theme that began to emerge in the mid-1980s. And there is sort of this chain of moving from data to information, to knowledge, to understanding, to decisions, to actions, and we hope ultimately positive outcomes. So, you'd like to follow that chain all the way from the data to positive outcomes. So we think that communities could benefit from what we're calling an air quality toolkit that would provide actionable air quality information, and especially thinking about vulnerable communities. Could that good guidance be provided to people? Could people answer questions like, well, how does my community compare to other communities? What's the risk? What's the risk to me of the air quality in my community? So we're hoping today to collect some questions about air quality that we think users are asking or should be asking in some cases. And we're hoping to get some thoughts about who should we be talking to, and maybe some suggested contacts. And ideally, maybe at least some preliminary thinking about defining a roadmap for creating an air quality toolkit for communities. So what would be in a toolkit? What are the user needs? What are practical technologies? Trust, how do you build trust? I've heard that a lot this week. And what would help to lead to actual positive outcomes? So we'll be discussing this, but we are going to make a quick transition right now to a Slido poll, and we're going to try to collect some input from our participants via Slido, and Beth Huffer is going to help lead us through the Slido activity. So Beth, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure, thank you. I have no idea actually how to lead a Slido, except to ask you to please go to Slido or slido.com and type in air quality and take our survey. We've got some questions in there that we are hoping will, your responses will provide us with fodder for a later discussion. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing your answers.
All right.
I'm coming on my computer, slido.com/air quality.
No, so you would have to do.
Pound sign to air quality. It'll, yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, that was I gave a bad explanation.
Oh. Great, we're seeing some. Yeah, so I think we could move. It is, yeah, do you want to? Sure, Beth.
Otherwise, I'm going to have to figure out how to get there to myself on my own computer. So I will, I'll give you that one back.
I think that's all that we've got for this one.
Okay, so I'll wait though. It looks like people are still typing, so we'll let people get through the whole thing. Is that?
Do we
Or
lose,
do we want to
do
go?
we lose the input on this one if we go to the next one?
No.
Okay.
So
It stays there.
Right,
so
sorry,
let's roll
yeah.
on to the next
Oh,
question.
you want, okay, yeah, sorry, group. I'm not a very good Slido leader, obviously. What do I do?
It's the first time for me as well.
Yeah.
There we go.
You're young though, and your brain is much more agile.
Oh, great. So we're getting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Combined with lack of awareness and knowledge.
So let's go ahead and keep
Move on.
rolling.
Okay. Whoops.
This is great that we're,
Oh.
yeah.
I right-clicked instead of left-clicking.
I should be doing this too, right? Maybe on to the next one.
Yeah.
Wow, we're getting lots of responses.
Yeah.
This one looks like the text is, I can't get the, this one is the answers.
All right, I'm going to go to the next one, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you go back to the previous one, I think Karen was
Oh.
typing in her response.
Oh, did we?
Oh, I thought people could answer in any, I didn't realize they were dependent on us
Yeah,
having.
apparently only one is active at a time.
So in my phone, one question.
Okay, I'm sorry, I did not know that. I thought
Yeah,
people
I
could
didn't know
just.
that. I didn't know that either. Karen, you're still typing?
No pressure, no pressure.
Okay.
Let her type. Okay.
So are we talking about, what do we think the sources of air quality are here? We say
yeah.
contributors. I realize now that's, okay.
Well, it was meant to be a little bit general and open-ended.
You can say this question if you want, but online participants will be the in-person participants will know.
Yeah, yeah, that's,
Right.
I mean, I'm just more curious to know how much people know about what's
Mhm.
creating air quality issues in their communities. And whether they want to know, and if that's a objective we should have. It's really
It's crazy.
painful. Is this the last one?
What's our participants? Participants. Okay, it's still.
Okay.
It looks like we still have some
Oh,
typing
was
to
I,
do.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm going back. Finish, type away, people.
We have overachiever. This is
We
good that
really
we're
do.
getting
Yes.
a small but vital group. I see some suspiciously Karen sounding items.
I'm doing it with one finger instead of my finger.
Site specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, last question, gang.
This question is about questions.
Right. This is getting to the heart of the subject.
Right.
Oh, it won't let me do another one. That's weird. It looks like it's only letting me put in one question.
Maybe by mistake I disabled that, so there's always this option that we have to enable if we can let everyone have multiple responses. I think I forgot to enable it in the last one.
Is it too late to,
Can we change it?
can we change it on
We
the
can.
fly?
I'm gonna leave that to you, Zahara.
I would have to pause this for a minute. And let's go ahead.
So the last question, can I add a second?
We're working on it.
Sahara's updating.
We have to change this setting.
Okay, should be good now.
Add response, yeah. Thank you. Okay. So we'll be able to preserve all of the responses.
This is our data.
Is there an upvoting thing where we can ask people to indicate it?
Because I did not see much.
Yeah,
Would you like to go back to these responses and then just talk about?
Yeah, I thought we could review them really quickly.
so
and
it
then-
looks like we.
Are we done?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, input is good.
It is. We're a small but opinionated group, aren't we?
So now I am deactivating the poll. We can go back to.
Wait, I think Karen wasn't finished.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Karen.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to take this time away from your time to present.
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Is everyone done? I guess, so should I move?
I think we can wrap. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's go to this first one. Yeah, so this was the first one, and you can continue scrolling to the next.
Great, thanks everyone for your participation in our poll. So we just want to run through these results really quickly and see what people are thinking about. And this first question was just to get a sense for what, like looking at a word cloud to see what people think about when they think about air quality. And of course, pollution is the primary concern. But health is a big one, and bad air, breathing, sore throat. Industry, what is industry up to, right? People want to know what the impacts and who's doing what to our air. What are the primary air quality concerns for you in your community? Code yellow, orange, red days, but not much behind what and why causes that. Yeah, good question. Who's doing this to us, right? Industry goals not balanced with community health, sustainability of living things, knowledge and awareness of indoor air quality. Yeah, we want to know what's in our air, why is that in our air, and what can we do about it? Sorry, I'm clunky. My hands are so cold. I'm actually having trouble manipulating the computer. What resources do you currently rely on for air quality? Hyper-local air quality sensors, Purple Air at my family's home. Is that you, Karen? Oh, so who has Purple Air at their home? It must be somebody online? Cool. Yeah, Air Now, apps, National Weather Service notifications, that's what I rely on too. Oh, there are more answers here. I can't even scroll, you guys, sorry. I'm sorry, I've been ignoring anything below the fold. Data dashboards, yeah, just the advisories in the media, so you get notified if the things are really bad, I guess. OpenAQ, weather apps. So apps seem like a big deal here. Okay, health. What it's related to air quality health is obviously the really big one. Vulnerable populations, green spaces, redlining, environmental justice, health, right? Solid fuel use, asthma, agricultural productivity, forest health. Why are those pine beetles killing all of our pine trees? Combustion. Here we go. What are the primary air quality contributors in your community? Pollution from buses, crop dusting, building material, recycling, industrial activity, truck traffic, consumer product usage, transportation, industrial waste, vehicular traffic, coal power plants, car emissions, aircraft vehicle emissions, upwind coal-fired power plants. Yeah. So we seem to all be familiar with the usual suspects. It'd be interesting to think about, whether there are other things out there too that are affecting us that we don't even know about. And so is that it? Was that the last one? No, sorry. What air quality questions do your community members want answered? Can I have my fireplace running safely? What are the acceptable thresholds? What are the health impacts? How does my community compare? How long can I work in my garden today safely? Which air toxins result in soil and groundwater contamination? What should I do? What should I do? Yeah, that's a great one. How is air quality related to climate change? How to convince county and state decision makers about cumulative health impacts of air quality. Another, exactly, guys, we don't want to breathe this stuff. How do we get people to take action? What are the chemical compositions of air toxins? Where to get easy to understand air quality information, like a weather app? How bad is my air? And how can I contribute to making things better? All right. Oh, are we done?
Yes.
Okay, that was the last one. Great answers, you guys. Thanks so much for all those inputs. I think we're gonna transition now. Karen is gonna give a presentation about work she's been doing in her own community related to air quality. I think you guys will really enjoy this because she's been working hard and addressing a lot of the things that have been mentioned here. And here comes Karen. Thank you very much, Karen.
Okay, so Karen Moe here, and that's great, yeah. So I've been working with this air quality monitoring project in Cheverly, Maryland, which is in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And we set up this hyperlocal air quality network. We pretty much got most of it up in April of 2021, last year. And there's been a little other projects that we've worked on. NASA created a digital twin, which took information from one of these units and also the EPA, federally regulated measurement systems, and created the two digital twins of air quality data in that region as close as possible. The EPA units are some 5 to 9 miles away, to create a little bit of a forecasting tool. And that was done last year as a student intern project. So we got involved in this project because our town managers would be faced with knowing about a new industrial installation coming to our neighborhood. So let me see, just go down, right? How do I go to the next? Oh, it needs to wake up. There we go. So this map shows the town. You can see the district line here between Maryland and the district. And in the gray areas are zoned industrial. And some of it's zoned heavy industry. We also have a train. The train line goes right through here, and this highway, US Route 50, major bus route going into the district, but also trucks. So we have a lot of pollution from traffic, and actually there's a lot of pollution that comes from just a lot of heavy traffic in the district itself. And the town was learned about in orange. I show a couple of fairly new initiatives. The one is a warehouse where they do the last mile distribution of, so lots of trucks coming in, bringing boxes of things then that need to go out that last mile into the community. Of course, it's not just 1 mile, but that idea. A lot of big trucks in, a lot of small trucks out. This other little square block here represents a bus depot with up to 120 city buses. that the depot, they want to be able to manage them. Currently, only about 40 of them are electric, but most of them are diesel. And they want to have a whole maintenance yard there with a 10,000 gallon diesel storage tank that they would only use, they say, for about 5 years when they transition completely to electric. And so we're putting our foot down and saying, wait a minute, let's just skip the diesel completely. If we're going to get you here, let's go clean. And we have an opportunity in working with this group in their facility. It's actually the district's facility in Maryland. And so we're really kind of looking for some compensation. And so some of the things we want to know are, can we get some air quality improvements by planting more trees, for example. I also show in this map the dark gray little box there is where there's a 100-year-old recycling junkyard, and they crush things that go boom, like what are they, kerosene tanks that aren't quite empty, and then that kind of thing. So lots of sources here, and Maryland gets lots of complaints from this area about air pollution problems. So we've instituted our Purple Air Network. There are these little purple dots. Most of them are real, and the state is using this network pretty effectively. And what we want to do is make the next step of getting data to the local government, so that when the next new group comes along saying, we want to put in another concrete batching facility in the neighborhood where they are crushing building materials from other building projects and making new cement, well, that recycling seems like a great idea, except that those processes are very dirty and they kind of get concentrated in these areas. So when they come along, we really want to be able to convince the decision makers that there is a balance that needs to be made between industry and the public health of those neighboring communities. And what I've been doing is really expanding the scope of our project. I work with the University of Maryland. They have funds from various sources, in fact, including Bezos' Earth Fund that we heard about on Tuesday, to expand the idea of these hyperlocal networks, because the state of Maryland has found a way of using them effectively to monitor and enforce the air pollution standards. So what I'm really interested in, and I'm just a new awardee of an ESIP Funding Friday grant, and so we're going to create a platform foundation that would reside in the cloud. My idea is with ArcGIS, and create a story map and a hub, and be able to bring in more data and more information as we learn more. I'd love to use the ideas that we generate from the air quality cluster to identify practices and guidelines for communicating. My primary audiences for this will be local governments, because they often only have a very short time to respond to a new development proposal, and to the homeowners in the whole area, residents who want to learn more. So ideas about education, and my role is really trying to reach out to the various community pockets and get them involved, but also feedback on ideas that we might be able to generate. So we're really creating a test bed for environmentally vulnerable communities and providing a whole feedback loop. They learn more, we learn more about what they need, and we can test out some data and ideas. So that's my use case.
Thanks, Karen. So I'm just going to throw out a couple more things that have come to mind, and then we'll try to have a little bit of general discussion with our participants and, any thoughts that you have beyond what you've entered into Slido. So one thought is communicating in terminology. I saw that someone was talking about code yellow, code orange, code red, and on the one hand, EPA's thinking was EPA generates the AQI, the Air Quality Index, which is a number. But the thinking was, well, that number isn't going to mean that much to people, but color codes, will be more meaningful, and kind of yes and no. Okay, like people can get it, presumably that code yellow is worse than code green and so forth, but there's still a question of, okay, but what does code yellow mean for me? When that's the information that's being produced. And some people might hear air quality index or AQI and not really understand, what does that mean? And the AQI is calculated looking at fine particulates, so-called PM 2.5, and ozone. And so typically you're seeing one AQI or code. It's only for one or the other. It's not even a composite, right? So you'll hear it's code yellow for ozone today, or it's code yellow for PM 2.5. I think that's hard for people to understand. I mean, on the one hand, it sounds simple, but I'm not sure that the average community member is really able to kind of get that. And the other thing that we haven't really talked about is the environmental justice concerns. There are these concentrations of industrial facilities, so-called Cancer Alley, other sites that have very high concentrations of industry, and people, unfortunately, vulnerable communities that are located near these concentrations of industry are exposed to a soup often of air toxics. So, you can talk about ozone and particulates, but when you begin to talk about volatile organic compounds, literally hundreds of toxic compounds that may be in the air at varying levels. That's a huge concern. There was a report published fairly recently by an organization called ProPublica that discussed this problem, and they identified, I believe, 1,000 toxic hotspots based on analysis of available data, where they kind of highlighted communities at potentially higher risk from air toxics, these toxic compounds. Unfortunately, it's great what we can do with sensors like Purple Air. They aren't really telling us anything about these air toxics. So this is an area where research could really help, developing low-cost sensors that are able to identify these compounds and their concentrations. I think that's kind of like a need, if you will. There are some sensors out there, they're very expensive, and there's just not a lot of that kind of monitoring going on right now. So that's kind of one issue that I would highlight, and the kind of smarts of the ESIP audience, I think, could help contribute to identifying ways to accelerate progress in that area. So those were just a couple additional thoughts I wanted to toss out. And, maybe at this point, we could actually have a little bit of interactive discussion. I know we have Colleen joining us remotely, and Colleen, I wonder if there's anything that you would like to say interactively. Please feel free to unmute yourself, and any questions that you have, any comments that you have, please, here's an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a thought. I really appreciate you mentioning, in terms of AQI, like the reporting that is done or what's being, calculated in here is just fine particulates and ozone. But what about, say, for example, VOCs, and also what about in terms of indoor air quality? I think in terms of sensors, I don't know how far we have to go in terms of low-cost sensors for VOCs. I know there's efforts to build, like, say, for example, Raspberry Pis and these Arduino sensors, but I don't know how good these sensors are. But I think one way to augment this is by open source data. And so OpenAQ, for example, kind of gets these data from many sources, and OpenAQ as the data repository for air quality data globally. There's this effort to put all of these air quality data, hopefully in a way that's more accessible to people. And if not, there's also tools that kind of bridge this gap, allowing people to create, say, for example, apps based from what is within OpenAQ. So yeah, if we don't have the physical instruments or the sensors yet, we may want to have, say, for example, reference data be hopefully open source and openly uploaded and shareable.
Thanks, Colleen. I hope we didn't, I hope we didn't lose you there. That I certainly agree. And you're also reminding me that I do think there are emerging opportunities with some of the NASA satellites and potentially European satellites to actually provide at least some more information about some of the other compounds, methane being one example. And there has been some really interesting work fairly recently involving methane and identifying major methane sources from space-based platforms. And for example, seeing the very high methane emissions associated with some oil and gas fields. So, and methane, of course, is an important greenhouse gas. So it seems like there's emerging tech that could help also possibly with some of the air toxics issues. But I think we're all believers in open science, open source software and hardware. So absolutely. Beth, you were, yeah.
I have a question for Karen, actually. I'm curious if you have observed an uptick in interest in air quality in your community as more information about air quality and the impacts of potential polluters have been made known to community members.
Absolutely. When the bus depot was proposed for our neighborhood, our community and two other municipalities that have, a mayor and people who should have been informed about it knew nothing about it. And so one of the people in our local government discovered it, reached out to the county and other people and said, hey, we need to know about this. And because of that, my mayor actually reached out to our local television, actually in the district, Channel 9, and they did an investigative report and came out. A couple of the other mayors joined, and the investigative reporter, had them just really discuss the issues. And they created for the 6 o'clock news on Washington, D.C. television, the short little 5-minute, 6-minute investigative report. I was invited to talk about the hyperlocal network, and so I met with one of our volunteers, and they just said, "Oh, just talk about what's going on there." So that definitely, and it was really through the mayor who reached out to the other municipalities to say what's changed here, and why don't we know about this, and why. I mean, initially it was told that this was a done deal and there was nothing we could do about it. But it turned out that there was a lot we could do about it, because there were NEPA studies and other activities. So yes, I would say definitely. But unfortunately, it was triggered by kind of a negative event. And what I'm hoping we can do is start working it into our community especially through schools and youth groups. So, and that's hard, because people are busy and they don't even think of this as a problem. But that's my goal, is reach them.
Let me mention one other thing that when I was kind of researching, putting a presentation together. NASA is such an amazing agency, and does so many things. And I know that NASA people don't all know everything about everything else that people in NASA are doing. So NASA developed, well, they were looking at ozone, right? Because there is a lot of space-based monitoring of ozone. And they began, well, cutting to the chase, because it was known that ozone affects vegetation, NASA started a program that they call ozone gardens. And yeah, you know about this, Elizabeth, yeah. And it's a really cool, more of a kind of citizen science type thing, where it's helping to make it more real for people, where you can actually see ozone impacts on plants, indicator plants that are relatively sensitive to ozone exposure. So I think, that ability to kind of make it more real for people, like, oh, wow, in fact, I've said, well, maybe the reason my tomato plants are turning yellow is because of elevated ozone, which we know we're having in the summertime. So I think that's a pretty cool example of, yeah, take the mic, Elizabeth, and don't be shy.
Thank you, Steve. I was wondering, I see there are 4 online participants. I was wondering, I saw Jody Harnden was participating in ESIP earlier in the week. Jody, if you're there, reveal yourself.
If only.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Colleen. All right. Well, Dr. Margaret Pippin at NASA Langley, she's involved in the Tempo mission, and she's our lead scientist for the GLOBE program, the air quality campaign. She worked with parks in the Newport News area to develop those ozone gardens, and it's a great tool for engaging the broader community. And I wanted to mention that the GLOBE program, if you're looking for community science opportunities, and also, ground-based data, that there might not be a purple air instrument in your community, but there might be some community science being done where people are collecting these data, or at least you could look historically at a community that's near your area for some baseline to compare your data to. I don't know, but all those data are available. And if you're not familiar with GLOBE, NASA has funded GLOBE formerly with NOAA in the past, but now is I believe the lead funder. It's over 25 years old. I think there's about 150 countries that participate. It's an effort through the U.S. State Department, and there are air quality campaigns going on worldwide. And finally, I wanted to mention, I think Colleen mentioned this earlier, about having people to develop their own sensors using Arduino and Raspberry Pi. And on the GLOBE site, you can find some recommendations for particular sensor kits. I'm thinking of one from Adafruit that you can buy and have students or have, at a variety of different levels, develop their own sensors. And that's something that's available.
And that beauty of open source hardware with that kind of technology. It was NASA that was doing some of the early analysis and part of what they developed was an estimate of $4 billion a year, if I recall correctly, in loss of the soybean crop in the United States due to ozone exposure. So $4 billion a year is kind of like real money. It also, it was recent NASA research, and this was in the AGU EOS journal recently. It was an analysis that appeared to demonstrate a really strong correlation between ozone exposures of teenagers and the onset of depression. So over like a 3 to 4 year period that they found higher rates of depression among these exposed populations. So I think that's an example of these kind of subtle potential impacts of air pollution issues. There's also, this is more of a legacy issue, but back in the days of leaded gasoline, if you're old enough, you remember that there used to be lead in gasoline, and all that lead didn't magically evaporate. It's an element, right? It's a metal. So back in the days when we had a lot of cars, primarily driving with leaded gasoline, that lead was disseminated into the environment, and you had exposed populations, and lead causes diminished intelligence and also behavioral problems. So there was a huge societal impact associated with those exposures, and that legacy hasn't really gone away. Beth, you.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Steve. I wanted to circle back to a point that Karen was making about hyper-local air quality.
Which is what I call real place, but yeah.
Yes, I know. I think this is important because you're mentioning these really enormous impacts on the soybean crop, on, behavioral problems associated with lead from gasoline that is still present. And I think sometimes we know about those things and we hear about those things, but they're not immediate enough in our own lives for us to take action. And so you had mentioned earlier this need for actionable information. And I think that is how we come back to this issue of hyperlocality or real place information. And so I'm curious what people's thoughts are, if people have ideas about how in our own communities we can increase awareness of what's going on right there. You mentioned your tomatoes. I've noticed my tomatoes have been bad the last couple of years. They have really thick skins and, and I want to know why. And if that's happening, how can we get information to community members about impacts right there and what's happening? And so I had an example. I had dinner last night with a urban ecologist who is doing work in Denver, where I live, funded by NASA, and in collaboration with our regional transportation district to look at bus stops and urban heat islands and how they might, instead of putting in those glass shelters that they do, put in trees at bus stops and what impact that might have. And I thought, one thing I noticed was it's much more interesting to me because it's in my town, right? It's happening in my town. If he had said he was doing it in Chicago, I'd find it interesting, but I find it even more interesting because it's in my area and I want more trees at the bus stops, and I want it to be not so painful to wait for a bus, right? So I'm curious just if people have thoughts about how, Karen probably does, how to engage our communities in a way that makes it personal for them. And I don't know if you want to start us off, maybe, Karen, do you have some suggestions for us?
I have gotten some suggestions just this week. One is to work through public libraries. And one of the things I think we might be able to start establishing is what's called like a civic data repository, and making it really available to the community via the county or local libraries. Most libraries these days have electronic connectivity, even though people in the community may not have it. So, I can imagine a station at the library where the public can log on to, what's my local health quality looking like. So that's one goal that I have. We actually have a local library that's going to be hosting one of our Purple Air sites a little later this summer. So there'd be a combination, an opportunity.
Meetings or something where people can be invited to the library from the community to hear from somebody who has information.
Yeah, so kind of have just a talk to open to the public. Yeah.
Experience
Let's
local,
maybe.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Colleen, please feel free. Colleen has been putting a lot of great comments into chat also.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt because I don't see everyone in the room, but yeah, I've been putting some comments in the chat. So in terms of community information, another nonprofit that I volunteer for always tables at the farmers market, and tabling at the farmers market is a great way to, have just people stop by and, look at information about, say, for example, air quality and how it affects your fruits, for example, or, whatever produce you're selling. And yeah, I think it's a great community outreach.
This is reminding me also, we heard in one presentation yesterday, I think, Karen, you were there, but the idea of civic data intermediaries, which seemed like a really good way to help communicate with people locally, which is sort of like a modified librarian kind of thing. You also have other organizations. You just reminded me, Colleen. I mean, I go to farmers markets. I also have a lot of friends who are master gardeners, right? And I myself am a master naturalist. And you have these growing communities of people. There's also, at least locally where I am, people who are called tree stewards. So you've got these networks of people at local levels who tend to be interested in, at least more from the gardening side or the, ecosystem nature side. And those networks could potentially be used as another means of outreach to broader communities. We also heard a lot early in the week about kind of community trusted entities. So in some communities, it may be the churches, for example, that are actually trusted, that are able to communicate with their members and kind of get messages across. So that's that's another thing to consider. Does anyone else in the room have any thoughts or any comments you'd like to make? I think
I have a question for the room. Do we have, oh, sorry, did somebody raise their hand and I just started blabbing? Okay.
Yeah.
I do have a question for people in the room about sort of the form information should take and whether anybody has thoughts about that. We've talked about purple air sensors, and air quality indices and that sort of thing, but whether or not that kind of presentation of information as numbers or data is effective. Is there something else that we could?
Dave's got his hands up. While we take the mic to Dave, I have one comment on that, which is, I don't know, and Dave knows this, I'm kind of a weather nut without the background or training, but when radar data became available with animated loops, I went crazy because to me that was so powerful to actually be able to watch the thunderstorms developing and moving towards me and that kind of stuff. And then Air Now began looping the air quality forecasts so that you could actually look at on an hour-by-hour basis the forecasted, for example, ozone levels. So I looked at those animations and I saw, oh, the ozone levels are lower in the morning, and as the day progresses, by late afternoon, the ozone levels are much higher. So I should have known that, but I didn't know that. And I had never heard anyone, in fact, I'm still not sure that I've heard anyone say, if you're a runner, for example, if you do vigorous outdoor exercise, you are much better off to do that early in the morning because if you, for whatever reason, if you do it later in the day, your ozone exposure will be much higher, and that puts you at greater risk. So that the power of a presentation like an animation, I think is significant. So just to put that out, and Dave, take it away.
Oh, thanks. Your question is really comes to the heart of what we're doing in the disaster lifecycle cluster, and Karen and I are the co-chairs of that, where as we look to connect to communities and connect them with trusted data, it was really amazing. We had Jonathan Bruno in our session the other day, who's the CEO of Coalitions and Collaboratives. They work with groups on the ground to help their communities become more resilient to wildfire. And they do, really on the ground things, build fences around streams so the debris flow and mud flow don't come into the town. So they build these big fences and have prescribed burns and things like that. And so as we look to connect communities with trusted data, we're going to want their input for how they want to interact with that data. And the thought here is that we could establish an initial community hazard information center, which is the form of a dashboard that could be updated every minute or however often they want to. We want to get local champions in those communities to say, we'll update it, and we want to get special training from ESIP and others to learn how to use this data so we don't misinterpret it. But that's just the first step. I mean, once the community accepts it as a hazard information dashboard, then air quality becomes an input that would probably be turned on all the time, right? Wildfire smoke, when wildfire's out there, I mean, we're already working with the HER smoke model, which has a parameter of near surface smoke. And I'm trying to get the modelers and NOAA to say, you know what, when you click on that, it tells you absolutely nothing. It has to tell you, don't go outside when this purple is over you or this orange is over you, because it will, for respiratory problems, people with those problems, it could be really devastating. So I think if we can be successful and work with a community as an example, then it will set the stage for all sorts of science data to come in, but you can't flood them with it. It's got to be gradual. It's got to be accepted by, like Steve said, those pastors in the community where people go to. People that speak different languages, they form their own communities, and they look inward for trusted information. They don't look outward. And so, language issues, or being able to pull a drop-down menu and say, hey, I need this in Portuguese, I need this in Spanish, I need this in, Russian, so people can understand what this information means. I think we'll take a really big step forward.
Thanks, Dave. And Susan has something.
Great comments, Dave. I'm not necessarily going to build on them, but I knew you would have great things to add to that. I was just going to share, so this April I was out in the Lake Tahoe area, and my older brother, he's an attorney, he knows everything, right? There's nothing I can tell him. He actually had an environmental undergrad and then a law degree, and his expertise is in privacy. And I was blown away to find out that he has 2 purple air sensors, one inside his house and one outside his house in Lake Tahoe, because he lives in San Jose much of the year. And the convenience he saw of being able to monitor the outdoor and indoor air quality at his home remotely was, that was a privacy trade-off he was willing to make and to take. And it actually came in handy when the fires last year at South Lake Tahoe started. My cousin lives in South Lake Tahoe as a teacher, and he needed a place to go. And my brother was very easily able to say, you can absolutely evacuate to my house in North Lake, and it's fine. And he can look at the air quality indicators to, not have to wait to see evacuations, because oftentimes the evacuations in fire areas, they're more looking at your fire risk. They're not looking at your human health risk. I had elderly parents in Prescott, Arizona, when they had their big fires, and I was like, Mom and Dad, I don't care that they haven't evacuated you. You can't breathe that. Get out. So I really like to see the advancements of that. And then I was just gonna, Steve, I was gonna say, I was the one that put the red, yellow, and orange comments up there. It's shocking for me as someone who's worked in the environmental field for 20 years, when I hear my air quality information is today is a code red day. And I'm sure for certain people, and probably a vast majority of the population, that's all they really wanna know. But for me, I'm like, why is it a code red day? Like, who do I have to blame for this? And what do we need to do about it? And so how do we connect? What's that next layer for those people that want to do something about it, to understand the why and the connection? Is it NOx? Is it SOx? Is it particulates? Is it ozone? And what are the sources of that, so that you can mobilize a community more to say, I don't want to accept this reality, I want to change it. So that was just my comment on those colors.
quick comment, real quick, and this, Susan gets me excited about this. We do work with private sector organizations, one of which is one of the biggest transporter of medical, like prescriptions and drugs, right? So they have, places, warehouses all over the place. One thing that I never really thought of, but one thing that they take very seriously is in their warehouses where they store the drugs, if wildfire smoke gets entrained into the warehouse, it can render all of the drugs worthless, just the smoke. And that's because when they go to deliver to a pharmacy or to a doctor or something like that, if they smell smoke, they don't accept it and it gets thrown away. So you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of drugs that are susceptible, right? We talk about cascading impacts of something happening that are really susceptible to smoke. And I imagine, I don't know how the poor air quality fits into that, but it's the smell of smoke that can do hundreds of millions of dollars of damage.
I'm reminded of something else in terms of practical guidance to people about what they can do. A lot of us have been talking about wildfires and wildfire smoke. One thing that I heard some EPA Office of Research and Development people say in a webinar that was like kind of, oh, duh, but what they were explaining was when people are evacuating and they're actually evacuating in a hot fire situation where they're driving through dense smoke, the simple point of make sure that people understand that they should be running the AC in their car on recirculate. Because at least with newer cars, with the cabin air filter, if you're recirculating the air, at least you're getting some filtration. You're actually better off than if you have the windows open, which, people might think, well, I need to get as much air as I can, but if it's a hazardous smoke situation, that will reduce your exposure while you're stuck in your vehicle trying to evacuate. So just kind of practical guidance in general for people. On the one level, you have Susan's point about, well, why is this happening and what can we do to, improve this situation? And then on the other hand, you have, while I am exposed, is there anything practical I can do to help protect my health? So I am going to call time on our session. We're just before 12:30, but I want to thank everyone for participating. And I think we got a lot of really great input. And so once again, my thanks to Sahara especially for helping our session, and to Beth and Karen and everyone else. So it's been a great ESIP meeting. And thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.